the need for so much gruesome, graphic violence? Why not let us imagine
Because it's so much fun, Jan. Get it?
All right, guys, you saw the title of the video. I am here to rank every Quentin Tarantino directed movie for you guys, doing my own personal ranking. I'm calling this a top 10 list, even though famously, for whatever reason, Quentin Tarantino only wants to make 10 movies in his whole career. I couldn't really tell you why. I guess he just likes even round numbers, but he has yet to officially come out with his 10th film. He keeps kind of going back and forth as to what it's going to be, and it's like, dude, just make more than 10 movies. It's okay, man. But whatever the case, let him do his thing. He's his own man. He only wants to make 10 movies. So for the sake of calling this a top 10 list, we are going to be splitting Kill Bill into Volume 1 and Volume 2. They were released as 2 films, so that's where we're getting the 10 out of. Anyways, normally I do more of a tier list ranking for director filmographies. I've done that in the past. I've done it for John Carpenter, Wes Craven, Sam Raimi, and a couple others. But for the case of Tarantino, I don't really see the necessity to do a tier list because, to be honest, he only made 10 movies so far, so he doesn't have as many as the others to rank. And also, most Tarantino movies are pretty damn good, so no film would really be below maybe a B tier at the lowest. And that's not as fun to make a tier list if all of your movies are jam-packed at the very top. You know, you want variety. You want to see where things land at a tier list. So I figured it would just be easier to run down a ranking list, do you guys a top 10 instead of doing a tier list for Tarantino. But here, of course, is the disclaimer that this is my personal ranking list of every Quentin Tarantino movie. This is not meant to be objective, and I am sure my list will look different than your list. So go ahead and put your ranking down below in the comments if you want to, and we can see how much we line up. This is just personal preference, and like I said, there's no bad Quentin Tarantino movie. So inevitably, something has to end up in last place, but that does not mean that I dislike the movie. I like every Quentin Tarantino movie. It's just, if you're coming up with a ranking, something has to be in last place. So in my last place, at number 10, I am going to put The Hateful Eight. So like I said, I do like The Hateful Eight. Some things that I really enjoy about it are, of course, the chemistry between the cast. I think that Sam Jackson is at some of his best here, along with Kurt Russell and just everybody, Tim Roth, you know, that's in the cast. And I love these characters banter back and forth. Of course, this film was made in a 70mm film, and it looks phenomenal, especially if you got a chance to see it in theaters. Just the big widescreen and the scoping mountainside of Colorado, just everything about it looks great, along with all these characters having to be trapped in one location together. And for some reason, I don't know if you consider that a subgenre of film, but I love movies where characters are all forced to be in one location and they can't leave, with the fact that every character has some sort of shady backstory and isn't necessarily telling the whole truth. It leaves a lot up to the audience to try to decide whose side that they're going to be on. And I heard rumblings that when Tarantino was making this movie originally, he was going to have Django be in it from Django Unchained, but he decided that he didn't want to have a heroic character, I guess, or more of a good guy character. He wanted every character in the movie to be kind of despicable, which is where we came up with The Hateful Eight, and I think it works better that way. But the reason why it's my least favorite is because I think after the big twist, the reveal of who is a gang member and who isn't, after the poisoning of the coffee, after all that shit goes down, you know, you have Sam Jackson interrogating everybody, all that stuff is great, but I think after that scene, the movie goes on for like another hour, and to me, it just kind of falls apart. Like, there's this whole backstory chapter where we see how all the characters arrived and how they, you know, killed the people that were there and took their place and all of that stuff. And I mean, it works fine as its own scene, but I felt like I didn't need any of that. Like, I didn't need to see the specifics of how they arrived at the haberdashery, how they killed everybody, and how they took their place, you know, waiting for the others to arrive, because after the reveal, you already know who they are. So I didn't need to go back and see all of that happen. And when we get back to the actual climax of the film, where it's that conversation between the survivors, you know, and Jennifer Jason Leigh's character, it just didn't have as much of an impactful ending as I wanted it to. Like, it just felt like everything built up to that moment, to that big twist of the reveal, And then after that, the backstory kind of took me out of it. And then the finale of the movie, again, I thought was just kind of okay. Again, I don't hate it, but this didn't feel like a movie to me that needed to be almost 3 hours long. I felt like this movie would have been better if it was like an hour 45, 2 hours. It felt like it needed to be a smaller story than what it ended up being. But that's just my personal preference. So yeah, that one is my least favorite, but I still like it a lot. At my number 9, I'm going to go with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Now, once again, I love this movie a lot. It's just I like the other Tarantino movies more. My favorite thing about this film is obviously the performances between Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio, most particularly DiCaprio's story when he has the conversation with that little girl actress and how like disillusioned he's become and how she kind of like motivates him within that scene. That's like my favorite portion of the movie, even more than the ending, which is just wild and crazy. But I think this movie has a particular vibe to it. It's a movie that you kind of, I think Tarantino calls these like hangout movies where you just kind of like live a day in the life of a character. And I appreciate this movie a lot. And I think it's one of those things where it's a movie that I appreciate more than I actually enjoy watching. I like it okay. It's just not as rewatchable to me as the other movies on this list, but I do think it's an incredible film. And I love that Tarantino, at this point, you know, this is after Inglourious Basterds and all those, that he's totally embraced the idea of changing history in his movies. And why not? Because it's a movie, it's fantasy, and even the title is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Like, you know, some people get mad at like the Bruce Lee scene or like how he changes history at the end. But to me, given the title alone and the fact that his main characters are fictitious, the whole movie is like a fairy tale. It's like a romanticized version of that, you know, the ending of the golden era of Hollywood. And so it works in that way. It's just not quite as rewatchable to me as the rest on the list. At my number 8, I'm going to put Death Proof. Now, a lot of people would say Death Proof is Tarantino's worst film, but I completely disagree. I like Death Proof a lot. In fact, I want to put it higher on the list, but his other films are just better. But I like Death Proof a lot. So Death Proof was originally part of the Grindhouse double feature. It was this movie experiment that Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez did where they both made a throwback 70s horror Grindhouse style movie with Planet Terror and Death Proof, threw them both together, made a bunch of fake trailers in the middle that other directors contributed in, and it was this kind of fun event throwback experience in the theater. But of course the movie didn't do too well because I don't think a lot of people knew what the movie was. Death Proof is objectively a lot slower than Planet Terror. And I think when you watch them back to back in the Grindhouse experience, I can understand how Death Proof kind of does take you out of it a little bit because Planet Terror is so in your face and there's zombies and explosions and gunfire and Rose McGowan has an AK on her leg. Like, it's just like there's all this crazy shit. And then Death Proof is more of like the serial killer stalking his victims sort of thing. So it's like it takes its time and we build up our characters before any of the kills happen. And so I could see why people kind of didn't like it as much. But if you watch Death Proof on its own with the added scenes back in, I think it works really, really well for what it is. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek, you know, it winks at the audience a lot. There's even a scene where Kurt Russell's character, you know, after Rose McGowan goes into the car where he looks right at the audience and throws a cigarette, like, you know, yeah, I'm going to kill this chick. Like, there's moments like that, but I love all the banter in the bar between all the characters in the beginning. I love Tarantino as Warren, the bartender, like, chartreuse, the only liquor so good they named a color after it. Like, I don't know, there's just, and of course the final car chase sequence at the end, which is crazy. And, you know, it might not look like much now, but the fact that he did it all practical because Tarantino doesn't like using CGI or anything like that. I love the final car chase sequence. I got to meet one of the actresses, Tracy Thomas, at a Comic-Con once. And I actually asked her if we could play Ship's Mast after the Comic-Con was over, where I, hold on to the front of the car and she drives really fast. And I don't know if she got a kick out of it, but she laughed. She could be acting because she's an actress. But I think I made her laugh with that one. Anyways, I like Death Proof a lot. At my number 7 pick, I'm going to put Reservoir Dogs, which is Tarantino's first movie. It's another movie that mostly takes place in all one location, although there are various flashbacks. And this was Tarantino's first attempt at making a film, and I thought he did an incredible job. Now, he definitely has gotten a lot better over time. I mean, you could tell when you go back and watch this movie and Pulp Fiction, there's a lot of scenes where the camera is just very, very stagnant, which works for its own style, but it's funny to see like how he's changed over time and how much more dynamic with the camera that he was more capable of doing in his career as time went on. But what I do love about this movie is that low budget nature of it. As somebody that aspires to hopefully make a movie someday, I really like watching directors' first films. I always talk about how Evil Dead is so inspirational to me, but Reservoir Dogs also kind of has that vibe because you didn't really have a lot to work with. And, Tarantino, of course, is very famous for his dialogue scenes and his characters' banter back and forth. But when you see it in Reservoir Dogs, to me, a lot of it is like, it needs to be engaging because we don't have the budget to do a lot of other things. But I mean that in a positive way. Like, his characters have to be interesting. His dialogue has to be engaging because he has no other choice. He has no name for himself yet. He doesn't have the budget to do an action spectacle like Kill Bill yet. Like, he has to make the dialogue interesting. And you can really see how, this was like the beginnings, the blooming of what he would eventually become known for. And maybe a little bit similar to what he would do with Hateful Eight later, you have a character in the ensemble who is not who they say they are. And it's fun kind of discovering that as an audience member and getting on board with whose side you're on. And also seeing the connection between Harvey Keitel and Tim Roth's character because inevitably that's going to blow up based upon who they are, but you kind of dig that father-son dynamic that they have. So Reservoir Dogs to me is a movie I love mostly because of that early filmmaker style. It's cool to see where directors begin and where their techniques start to blossom from. And it's just one of those films that makes you feel like, yeah, I could make a movie someday, maybe. At my number 6, we're gonna bridge the halfway spot with Kill Bill. So at number 6 is going to be Kill Bill Volume 1. And the reason why this is here is just simply because I think Kill Bill Volume 2 is just a little bit better because you get a little bit more story. But Kill Bill Volume 1, of course, introduces us into this world that is heavily exaggerated with assassins and martial arts and Western elements and all of these things that Tarantino grew up loving. He just kind of splashed them all together into one cohesive unit, making a movie series that you would think on the surface level is all over the place. How can you have all of these elements in one? And yet he somehow is able to do it, most particularly with Kill Bill Volume 1, which is very action focused. And this was actually the first Tarantino movie that I ever saw. So I rented Kill Bill Volume 1 out of nowhere, not knowing what it was. And that opening scene where Vivica Fox just opens the door and Uma Thurman just punches her in the face and they start having this epic battle. Immediately, I was enthralled by the film. At the time, I was like 13, 14 years old, and I loved anime, and seeing Tarantino actually put in a full anime hyper-violent sequence in the middle of a mainstream movie, that blew my mind. As well as I was a big martial arts fan at the time. So I loved, Jackie Chan, Jet Li, Bruce Lee movies. I was already a big fan of all that stuff. So seeing the sword fighting and the samurai stuff and the kung fu stuff, all of that just grew my attention. And I was like, who is the director of this movie? And it's what caused me to go back and watch all of his other movies. But at number 5, I am going to put Kill Bill Volume 2. So as much as I do love all of the spectacle and action sequences of Volume 1, I was gravitated to the story, and after watching Kill Bill Volume 1, it was one of those moments where I was heavily anticipating Volume 2. Like, I couldn't wait until Volume 2 came out, and I think that had the greater impact on me when I saw it. Because of watching Part 1 first, I was all primed and ready and hyped that every single needle drop in Volume 2, getting more context of the bride's history, as well as seeing her face off against Elle, she has that one moment where Elle's like, I'm going to take your sword in the immediate future. It's going to become my sword. And then the bride just looks at her and she just says like the most badass line in movie history. She's just like, bitch, you don't have a future. Love it. But where it really nails it for me is the emotion of the final sequence where the bride shows up at Bill's house and discovers that her daughter is still alive. That moment hit me like a ton of bricks. It still does. And, you know, I always say that I have a soft spot for father-son, you know, dynamics and stories, but, you know, mother-daughter dynamics can also hit me the right way sometimes, and this was one of those moments. So, yes, Kill Bill Volume 2 is my number 5. At my number 4, and here's where everyone's going to hate me if they don't hate me already, my number 4 is Pulp Fiction. I know, everyone hails Pulp Fiction as Tarantino's best movie, but listen, in a guy's career that's made nothing but great movies, having it at number 4 is still pretty damn good. Of course, I love Pulp Fiction. This movie just has flair, it has style. This is where Tarantino really solidified himself as the filmmaker that he was going to be. Reservoir Dogs was that initial attempt, and then he took everything that worked in Reservoir Dogs, just amplified it times 1,000, and created Pulp Fiction with these interconnecting stories, which he did like the chapter things in Reservoir Dogs 2, but once again, perfected it here in Pulp Fiction. And of course, you have the phenomenal performances by Travolta and Sam Jackson as Jules, just instantly memorable, along with Bruce Willis. There's so many things to love about this movie. And I think if you are checking out Tarantino's work, obviously Pulp Fiction is a must-see. You know, it kind of represents that entire early era of Tarantino, and also when he really propelled into the mainstream. It's a fantastic movie, and I have nothing bad to say about it. I just happen to like 3 other Tarantino movies a little bit more. And at my number 3 spot is going to be Jackie Brown. So Jackie Brown is the movie that followed Pulp Fiction, still came out in the 90s, and it is the only Tarantino movie that is an adaptation of a book, because all the other films he created from scratch, they are his stories alone. Jackie Brown, although many things are changed, is an adaptation of the book Rum Punch. And it's essentially a heist movie, but there's something about the vibe of this movie that I just can't get out of my head when I watch it. It's more grounded and realistic than a lot of his other movies are, and I think that might be the nature of adapting a previous work. And one of the other things that Tarantino was kind of known for early on is taking an actor that hasn't really had a lot of work or hasn't really been in the spotlight recently and putting them into the lead role of a movie. You know, people famously say he revitalized John Travolta's career with Pulp Fiction, but in Jackie Brown, the lead character, Jackie Brown, is played by Pam Grier, that Tarantino was a huge fan of from her work in the 70s, and she does a fantastic job here. She has so many different dynamics she has to play because she's essentially conning both the police officers that are investigating her, but also Sam Jackson's character, who's this gun runner, and she also has a little bit of a relationship with this bail bondsman played by Robert Forster, who is also amazing in this movie. But I think, to me, the most amazing actor in this movie is Sam Jackson. This is my favorite Samuel L. Jackson performance because I think that he is simultaneously fucking hilarious, but also more terrifying than he's ever been before. To me, this is the scariest Sam Jackson character because he will just smile in your face, but 2 seconds later be willing to kill you and manipulate you to do so. And he just seems to have this sense of authority in this movie that he can just switch on at a moment's notice. Like, there's a moment where he's speaking with Robert De Niro's character after the heist goes wrong and trying to figure out what happened, and it's just like a super intense, scary moment. The entire thing is shot from behind them too, which makes you wonder, like, you know, what he's doing. Like, is he going to grab a gun? Is he just staring at him? Like, there's just so many moments in this movie with Sam Jackson's character that have you on the edge of your seat as to what he's going to do. There's an extended sequence early on in the film where he kills Chris Tucker's character, and it might be my favorite scene in the movie because everything just slowly and subtly builds. Like, you know what he's going there to do, and he's convincing him to go with him, and he's giving him all these reasons why he has to. And when that music starts up, when he throws him in the trunk and he's putting on the gloves, and it's like, that scene lives rent-free in my head forever. I think this is a really underrated movie because it's not as exaggerated as some of his others. Like, it's not as over the top. There's not a bunch of action scenes. Like I said, it's very, very grounded, very dialogue-based, obviously, as it was one of those early era Tarantino movies. But I think this one gets swept under the rug a little too much. And to me, I think the more that I watch it and the more that time goes on, I like it more and more. Like, if you would have asked me when I was in my 20s, you know, I probably would have had Kill Bill and Pulp Fiction over Jackie Brown. But after continuing to rewatch it year after year, it just keeps moving up. And so right now it's my number 3. But my top 2 are my top 2, and I don't think anything is going to top them unless he really pulls something great out of his ass. Number 2 is going to be Django Unchained. Django Unchained is just badass from start to finish. It's tragic, it's heartbreaking, it's action-filled, the performances are wild. It makes you feel so many different emotions as it goes on. You have this slave, Django, that becomes a bounty hunter with Christoph Waltz's character. You have their whole adventure together, and then as they descend into the madness of Calvin Candy's plantation, played by DiCaprio, which, by the way, at the time that this came out, seeing DiCaprio play this kind of a despicable character was amazing. You know, because DiCaprio usually plays the lead in a movie. You know, he's such a big, high-profile actor that, you know, it's rare to see him in a movie where he doesn't even show up until after an hour in, and he plays the antagonist. And in a way, not even the main antagonist, because you have Samuel L. Jackson in there again. But this movie works on so many levels. It works, of course, as a Western, as an action film, but also, obviously, the tragedy of what's happening during this era of slavery and having to see characters go through certain things that just, like, makes you cringe. But at the same time, the movie doesn't beat you over the head, like, with the fact, it's not trying to tell you that slavery is bad. It's just, like, that's, like, obvious. It's, like, no shit. And so it just throws you into the world. So it's not trying to make you feel terrible, but, like, you have to have that context in order to feel the catharsis of Django, you know, freeing his wife and killing everybody at the plantation and stuff. And it's because of that that I think that you earn it. Like, you see enough horrible shit happen, like the scene with the dogs and the fighting, and you see enough horrible things along the way that that ending sequence where Django is unleashed, you know, at the very end. He's unchained! Unchained! Yes, Django is unchained in the movie. So, yeah, it makes the finale worth it. And there's moments where, you know, the man sets off this explosion, and all the cool characters in every other movie don't look at the explosion. You know, they walk away while it explodes. Django, nah. He stands there, proud, triumphant, puts on the sunglasses, and watches the carnage that he created. And, yeah, fantastic stuff, man. Django Unchained. But there is one Tarantino movie I like more, and obviously that is Inglourious Basterds #1. You know, the final line of Inglourious Basterds is Brad Pitt saying, "I think this just might be my masterpiece." And I really do think this is a masterpiece. This movie is in probably my top 10 favorite films of all time for so many reasons. It's a great movie, but I think that it deserves even more credit than it actually gets, because there's very subtle things that are happening in each scene that, you know, taken bit by bit, you just appreciate more and more. I think this has one of the best opening scenes of all time. Hans Landa walks into the Frenchman's house, and he's interrogating him about harboring the Jews, you know, that are under his floorboard and everything. And Christoph Waltz's performance, the way that he looks at the three daughters, the way that he intimidates, the way that he speaks, and all the little methods that he does with his, you know, charm and pulling out the bigger pipe, and knowing that at the end of the day, he was winning this conversation from the very start. The Frenchman had no chance whatsoever. And the actor that plays the Frenchman, you know, how his emotions start to change as he realizes that he's totally fucked. There's just so many things happening in this scene that are incredible. And that's what works so well about Inglourious Basterds 2, is that you can take scenes individually. If that was just a short film, like if the first chapter was just a short film, it works. And you don't even need the context of the rest of the movie. And I feel the same way about the tavern sequence with Michael Fassbender, where they're down in the tavern and they're forced to play that card game with the Nazi soldier, and everyone's trying to get through this as painlessly as possible and keep up the mystique and keep up the facade. And what I think is really intelligent about this movie also is how much it focuses on language. Now, a lot of times where you would see these old World War II movies, everybody would speak English for the convenience of the audience. But what Tarantino did in this movie that was so clever is have language play a pivotal role in the story. It's a matter of how well can you speak the language? How well can you fake it? You know, how well can you speak German? How well can you speak French? And to have a antagonist, Hans Landa, be like a linguistic genius and be able to speak all of these different languages, you know, people aren't able to infiltrate and pretend to be you know, German soldiers if you can't speak German the way that Germans speak it. And that's what's so fascinating about that scene, is that, you know, and that's not Hans Landa in the scene, but you know the character knows that Michael Fassbender is full of shit, but he can't quite prove it. And so the best way for infiltration is how well you can speak the language, and that's incorporated into the story, which I really, really liked. And yes, there are these extended sequences that are in other languages, and if you're an American like myself, sometimes that can be frustrating because we're ignorant and we only speak English, but I think here it works extremely well, and I love how it was done. Not to mention the finale and how it all culminates into that, you know, the theater premiere, and I like that he puts, you know, a movie essentially being like this piece of propaganda that was, you know, it never stops. There's always propaganda, but that being a core element of the climax of the film. And then also, this was the one, I think, the first example of him deciding to write his own history and know that movies are fictitious anyways, so why not just end the movie you want to end it and just blow Hitler away. I also love how quick the violence is in this movie. Like I said, that tavern scene, like, it just builds tension perfectly, and I love that when the chaos breaks out, it's over in like 30 seconds, because that's how it would be, you know? And so, like, it's like a stick of dynamite. You know, these scenes are like dynamite where the fuse is just going and going and going, and the tension's getting higher and higher, and then when it explodes, it's just over, you know? And that's what I love about it too. So there's so many reasons I love this movie. It's got good humor in it too, oddly enough, you know, like Buongiorno. You know, it's like, okay, Brad Pitt. Anyways, yes, so Inglourious Basterds is my #1 Tarantino movie. So there you guys have it. That is my ranking list of all of the Tarantino directed movies until he puts out his 10th and final film, whenever that will be. So I know that my list will probably be controversial in some way, shape, or form, and people will be mad at me no matter what, but I think that's the fun of it. So go ahead and put your ranking of Tarantino's films down below. What's your #1? You can put your top 5, top 3, or your full top 10, whatever you guys want to do. Other than that, thanks for watching the video, guys. I do appreciate it. Give it a thumbs up and a comment. And like I said, for other directors, I've done tier lists because they just have like way more films in their filmography, so check those out. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a wonderful day. Go watch a Quentin Tarantino movie. There's been a snowstorm around me, so hey, even though Hateful Eight was my last favorite, maybe I'll watch it today because it seems appropriate. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate you. I'll talk to you next time.